Now, the Labour Party has at last taken a side between striking workers and profiteering bosses. Whose side have they chosen? Well, here's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy explaining Labour's rail strike position.
Do you support these strikes?
No, I don't support strikes because I support the right to strike, of course. But it's very sad when any union calls its members out on strike. It hurts working people who need to get to work by using the railway. And of course, those within the union are hurt as well.
Lammy supports the right to strike. He just doesn't support anyone actually using that right. So what's the right to strike for? Rail bosses just made £500 million in profit subsidised by the state. They're putting up ticket prices in line with inflation while cutting real wages, which is a great recipe for raising their profits. And here's the rub. The RMT aren't even asking for a real pay rise. They're just asking for a slightly smaller real pay cut. The government is intervening to prevent that, precisely because they don't want to set an example to other workers that profits can be redistributed into higher wages if workers fight for it. That's the class politics of inflation. Prices rise, wages flatline, and bosses scoop up the difference in higher profit. Then the Tory party defends those bosses. What's the point of having a Labour Party if it can't push for workers to get a bigger share? Instead, Lammy actively joins in the divide and rule strategy of the Tories, pitting commuters against rail workers. But falling pay for station cleaners won't mean higher pay for teachers or nurses, just higher profits for rail bosses. Striking is the only immediate tool that all workers have to redistribute wealth from powerful bosses. Next, Lammy was asked on the BBC about British Airways workers who've had their pay slashed by bosses by 10% while their energy bills soar.
It would not be right, it would not be responsible opposition if I suggested yes to every strike, you should get your... No one would think...
So do you support them or not?
No, I don't. No, I don't. It is a no. It's a categorical no.
Why?
Because I'm serious about the business of being in government, and the business of being in government is that you support negotiation.
There you have it. Governing the British state necessarily means siding against workers, says David Lammy. Continuing his media round on Sky News, Lammy was asked about postal workers. Royal Mail made £700 million in profit last year, recently privatised, and they paid their CEO £1.5 million. Now, just like other bosses, that CEO wants to use inflation to push through real terms cuts to his workers' wages. Guess what David Lammy had to say?
Are you going to back them if they ballot for strike action?
Every grown-up in the country watching this programme knows that this is a negotiation. And I'm afraid it is not always the position that one party to that negotiation gets what they want. It's a negotiation, and usually negotiation ends in compromise. That's the grown-up position.
Tragically, it wasn't always like this. In those brief Corbyn years, David Lammy was more than happy to stand on picket lines. Here are two of his greatest hits. In 2016, and again in 2018, Lammy proudly stood on picket lines to support doctors and university staff, and he even tweeted about that. These days, he talks a different talk. Here he is again on Rupert Murdoch's Times Radio.
This is not a moment for posturing and standing on picket lines and forgetting the responsibility that you have if you hope to be either Prime Minister or a minister running this great country.
The sad thing is, this is pure posturing from David Lammy. Standing on picket lines isn't some game, and it's not about reenacting the 1970s. It's a strategy now, in 2022, after 50 years of rising inequality, decades lost to austerity, and roaring pandemic profits, while workers' real wages are eroded. Strikes are an attempt to reset the balance in a country whose wealthy have had it all for far too long. The Tories are openly planning more anti-union laws to further defend the power of the rich against their workers. They want to introduce minimum staffing requirements to ban some workers from fully striking. David Lammy cannot imagine a Labour Party bringing all workers together against this great wealth grab. The choice is simple, and it was put by a real Labour leader, Dave Ward of the Communication Workers Union.
If people look at the financial crisis, 2008, the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, the climate crisis, the only certainty in the UK at the moment, if we don't make a stand for all working people, is that the rich are going to get richer and the powerful are getting more powerful. And that's what we've got to address in the UK, including in how the economy operates.
Meanwhile, the leader of one of Britain's biggest unions, Sharon Graham of Unite, pulled no punches in her response to David Lammy. David Lammy has chosen to launch a direct attack on British Airways workers. This is a group of workers who were savagely attacked by their employer during COVID. Fire and rehire led to thousands of unnecessary job cuts and pay being slashed. This dispute is not about a pay rise. It's about restoring money taken out of workers' pockets by an opportunistic employer. British Airways and its parent company, IAG, hold billions in reserves and assets, and they're predicting a return to profit this quarter. Supporting bad bosses is a new low for Labour, and once again shows that politicians have failed. It is now down to the trade unions to defend working people. We are their only voice. This is a seismic moment, and the battle lines are these. Will the rich, in government and in boardrooms, massively cut the living standards of the poor, or will we keep down inflation by cutting prices, profits, and rents that flow to a few? That's the choice, and the Labour Party leadership is missing in action. Those who stand in the middle of the road get run over. Ash, David Lammy was very happy to posture. That's his word about protests. He was happy to posture on the streets and cost Labour an election by marching for a people's vote to keep us in the EU. Why is it so much harder for him to support workers?
These people are whoppers and they are self-serving. And unlike political opponents who I can respect, who have principles which I think are detrimental to the public good, but they have those principles, the likes of David Lammy and Keir Starmer are motivated by nothing else than what they think of as being politically expedient at any given time. And you can see that in terms of his own weather vaning on the issue of whether or not a serious party of government should be seen standing on picket lines. It wasn't that long ago that he was joining picket lines in his own constituency, standing with junior doctors out on the picket lines, standing with striking lecturers, and plastered those images all over his social media. Similarly, Keir Starmer, in I think what is now going to go down in history as one of the most brazenly deceptive campaigns ever. When he was running to be Labour leader, one of the first things he says in one of his videos is, "I'm Keir Starmer and I'm a proud trade unionist," whether that's doing legal observing on the whopping picket line, and going on about how his Labour leadership would not simply stand up for trade unions when there's a photo opportunity, but stand shoulder and shoulder even when it gets tough. Those things melted away as soon as they decided to implement, which I think was their strategy all along, model of Labour leadership, which involves showing your belly to the likes of Rupert Murdoch and Viscount Rothermere and going, "Oh, please don't kick it too hard, sir," and hoping that that's going to lead to a thumping election win and a majority and, you know, back-to-back elections in a row like their hero Tony Blair. Sorry, I accidentally called Tony Blair a human there for a second. And I find it completely risible and contemptible that you could chuck your principles in the bin so readily as that, because at least the Conservatives, they don't pretend to believe in this shit, you know, and then throw it away the next day. They're like, no, when it comes to the battle between Labour and capital, we're with capital. Whereas the Labour Party, and this has always been an uncomfortable part of their history as much as the representation of organised labour has been a part of their history, the unfortunate truth is that the leadership has often been characterised by turning on the very people that they're supposed to represent in the interest of a couple more points in the opinion polls. Now, it hasn't even worked out that way. The latest polling for Keir Starmer has shown that he's dropped a point in his net approval rating. So what does that tell you? It tells you that having no principles is considered worse than having bad ones. Stand up for something or you'll fall for anything.
Precisely. They just have no interest in the present. They live still in a 1990s world where electability means moving to the right, and they are totally uninterested in a world of inflation pushing the cost of living up and profits soaring, and the obvious possibility of assembling a coalition around working people who want better living standards for all of us, not rising rents and profits for a few. There's a huge political opportunity there, and they're too busy telling us they're grown-ups to actually act like grown-ups and look the present in the face.
All of us here at Novara Media are working harder than ever to keep scrutinising establishment politicians and the media barons who protect them. We don't have billionaire funders. We don't have advertising partnerships. We're funded entirely by you. If you've ever thought about supporting us, now's the time to go to novaramedia.com/support and donate anything you can from just £1 per month. Defy the corporate media. Join our monthly supporters and help build our supporter base to 10,000 strong.